It is my, just being talked over by the recording message, it is my pleasure to introduce Josh Introne. He's an assistant professor in the School of Information Studies at Syracuse University. He directs the interdisciplinary C4 lab, which uses computational techniques to study the dynamics of online communications. Josh's research leverages complex systems theory and cognitive science to inform the design of social systems for societal benefit, with a particular focus on misinformation and how it impacts on belief formation. Today's talk will discuss his recent work to measure how individuals travel within the landscape of collective beliefs on climate change. You may have heard our discussion about the questions, so if there's any burning questions as we go, please speak up. Otherwise, we can wait to the end. If you raise your hands, I will call on you, or if you type it in the chat, I will read out the questions. Without further ado, over to you, Josh.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot. This is a nice end to my semester. My last class was yesterday, so it was a nice way to cap it all off. This is, so thanks for the introduction, Tristan. These slides are kind of fresh, so there may be bugs, and you are welcome to interrupt me and ask questions. This is really, I'm going to be talking about some work that is to appear in ICWSM next year. The paper was just recently accepted. So that's the meat of this talk, but I'm wrapping it in this idea of building a social media belief observatory. So I'd like to start there, and then we'll dive into the bulk of the actual research. So let's see here. So sort of the fundamental object of inquiry here in the idea of a belief observatory is belief dynamics, which is really the study of how beliefs develop, change, and spread in a population. And there's been a lot of work on belief dynamics in many different fields, from physics to political science, information science, communications. But there's not really a good uniform way for talking about belief dynamics. Physicists tend to use statistical models that are highly theoretical, and they explore the mathematical properties of those models. And then political scientists will use surveys and analyze survey data, but they're really only looking at political beliefs. So the idea with the belief observatory is that maybe we can use social media data to get a much better understanding of belief dynamics. So in case it's not, immediately apparent, why should we care about any of this? Belief dynamics have an awful lot to do with all of the current, the latest and greatest problems with the internet and social media, right? So misinformation, toxicity, extremism, bias, polarization, all of these at some level are connected by beliefs. And so we have a lot of people looking at these individual phenomena, but underlying all of them is something about, why do people believe in misinformation? Why are we seeing this massive polarization online? How does extremism evolve? So belief dynamics is a way of getting at all of these problems. And I think that this is interesting, right, in terms of the phenomena that we witness online, but I also think it's really critical that we investigate this stuff, because what we believe in has an awful lot to do with how we deliberate and make decisions as a species. And that's going to influence how we adapt. It's going to influence the performance of democracy, ultimately how we sustain our civilization on this planet. and I think ultimately whether or not we survive. So when I'm talking about belief dynamics, I'm thinking about something that is very, very important for our species. So why the research community, us in particular, and you could address this from the perspective of, and I mean the technical research community. So sociologists seems sort of like a humanistic kind of question, right? Sociologists might investigate this, anthropologists, others, political scientists. But I think that information scientists or more technical people, engineers, should really be focusing on this problem, because we're in a really good position to introduce new methods for measurement. We can think about what is an optimal dynamics for belief in a given society, and we can design tools that might influence this. Okay, so this all comes to the idea here of building a belief observatory. So I don't know if anyone is familiar with at Indiana University, they have what they call OSOME. It's OSOME, the Online Observatory of Social Media, or something like that. They built a platform a few years back called Truthy, which was supposed to look at Twitter and tell us whether or not we see lots of misinformation. And I think they have Hoaxy and a whole bunch of other tools that are part of this belief or part of this social media observatory. So I'm thinking about something similar. We could build an infrastructure, an open infrastructure that is used for analyzing beliefs of the population through the lens of social media. And with this kind of tool, we can run lots of studies to analyze belief dynamics, maybe identify natural experiments to test hypotheses, and then study the impact of different types of design interventions, good or bad, right? You can think of disinformation as a type of design intervention. We can figure out what exactly disinformation is doing to belief dynamics. Or we could think about how to redesign Twitter or Facebook. Maybe Twitter's going to go away anyway, or Facebook, right? To see how that shifts belief dynamics. Okay, so that gets me to the core research here, which is an approach that I've developed to measure the belief dynamics using Twitter, and there's a link down there, a stable link to a preprint of the paper. This paper really introduces what I'm calling the belief landscape framework. So the belief landscape framework is based on this model of beliefs, where we say that the belief state of any individual at a given point in time is a vector of dispositions with respect to a set of atomistic belief propositions. And so maybe that's a little bit of a mouthful. When I'm thinking about belief propositions here, though, I'm thinking very broadly. So at the end of the day, right, this is almost, you could think of this almost as the strong AI hypothesis, which is that we can digitize a human brain and thereby capture human intelligence in silicon, right? So the idea here is that we could capture the entire state of someone's beliefs as, sort of a digital representation. And there's sort of a philosophical question here, whether or not this is reasonable. But in my framework, I believe I treat beliefs as, or a belief state as Markovian, in the sense that if we have a complete enough representation of an individual's beliefs, we can predict with some degree of accuracy, or with a high degree of accuracy, what their next belief state is likely to be, if we have enough information, if our representation is complete enough. Okay, so this is the vision. So with this representation, we have a belief state here, right? So we've got these dispositions with respect to cats are yummy, science is real, I am a ghost, Trump is an alien, right? And we can measure how these things change over time and across the population. But these things don't vary entirely independently, right? Beliefs are connected to one another. So this idea comes from maybe seminal work in belief, understanding belief states, comes from Philip Converse, who was a political scientist, and he introduced this idea that beliefs are more or less coherent within an individual's psychology. And what that means in Converse's approach, he said that there are ideal belief states. And in those ideal belief states, these beliefs are maximally coherent in the sense that, and he was talking about political belief spectrums. So you have liberals and you have conservatives, and people on either end of those have coherent sets of beliefs. Now, in Converse's treatment, he was kind of an elitist in his approach to politics. And he said that people who are well-educated tend to have more coherent beliefs than people who are less well-educated. And he showed this by a set of surveys. But I think the challenge with that idea is that it presumes that there are only two possible coherent belief states, or however many you want to decide from your position. So I use coherence to describe an empirical phenomenon rather than a normative phenomenon. And all that means is that if you go out and you look at all beliefs across a population, you're going to find that they cluster together. And it's hard to say, in the abstract. I don't know what the rule is that governs coherence, but it is the case in a population that some belief states are more coherent than others. So you can imagine, certainly conservative and liberal belief states are highly coherent. And then you have QAnon. That's another coherent belief state, and the people that believe in the vibrations of crystals, and what that has to do with well-being, that's another coherent belief state, right? So you imagine across a population, there are many, many different coherent belief states. And there are some belief states that are less coherent. And those would generally be those held by those individuals who are maybe transitioning between coherent regions, okay? And so from this perspective, maximally coherent belief states are attractors for a population. The population will tend to flow towards those attractors. Once they are in attractors, they are less likely to leave. People who have less coherent belief states are likely to move towards an attractor. So I hope that's clear. It's hard to read feedback from the blank Zoom screen, so I'm just talking and hoping. Okay. So if you can imagine, we have a range of coherent belief states. Some of them being more coherent than others. There is likely to be some sort of dynamics across those belief states, which can be observed in the movements of people across belief states. So if you think about, if you envision that there are say 20 belief states, some of them are going to be more coherent than others. And it is, there's psychological research that shows that people like to have some sort of internal coherence. You've heard the term cognitive dissonance. We tend to not like cognitive dissonance. And so an incoherent belief state would have more cognitive dissonance, and we would move towards a position where we reduce that cognitive dissonance over time. So this sets up a pattern of flows, okay? And as such, this reveals a dynamic system, okay? And the dynamic system can be envisioned as a landscape where you've got some attractors, some belief attractors. These are belief states that are highly coherent. Some belief attractors are really, really coherent, so very attractive. Some are less attractive, but they may be local optima. So if I'm wandering around the space of possible beliefs, trying to find find a coherent region, I may get sucked into a local attractor, and I'm just stuck there. It looks like the best place for me. And then maybe there's something that kicks me out of that. Maybe it's my friends, or maybe it's an event. And I wander the surface until I find the next coherent attractor. Okay. So this is the belief landscape framework. This is the model that underlies the research that I'm doing on social media. So from this model, we can come up with a few predictions here. So, and these predictions are, people will tend to visit few attractors. So that means they'll get stuck in an attractor, and then they won't like jump around wildly from attractor to attractor. They tend to fixate. Individuals who are outside of the center of an attractor or near weak attractors are more likely to jump to new attractors than others, okay? So people who have highly coherent belief states are less likely to change them. And this is consistent with previous research on belief states and belief systems. Transitions between belief attractors are more likely between those belief attractors that are close to one another. So this implies that we have some measurement of close, but we have the landscape. So things that are close on the landscape you tend to see more flow between those places. And then finally, people who are close together on a landscape will tend to have similar affiliation networks. And that simply means that there's some homophily that goes on amongst people based on their beliefs. Most of my friends will tend to believe what I believe in. So these are 4 predictions that we make going into this study. Okay, so to evaluate these predictions, I collected 5 months of Twitter data. Actually, someone else collected it. I just used it. And this data was all about focused on climate change. So we use the Twitter streaming API to capture all tweets, or the fraction we could get from Twitter with terms like climate change, global warming, etc. This gave us 29.3 million tweets, but after whittling it down, only about 4.7 of those tweets were in English and were unique tweets. And there are about 13,000 users in this data set who are not bots and who were also active for 4 weeks. There were a lot more users, but they were not active very long, and we dropped them out of the data set because it's really hard to get a read on an individual's beliefs if they're not around for a long time and not active enough. We also used retweet networks, and this is a technique that was developed in the literature on stance detection. We used retweet networks to classify people into climate skeptics and climate believers. And we validated that by a couple of mechanisms, and it turned out to be a really good it looks like a really good fit. All right, so we've got this data set, and we've split them into climate skeptics and climate believers. And what we want to do is extract a belief landscape to evaluate our hypotheses. Okay, so here's the analysis pipeline, and this is the algorithm that we built. I think this is a first pass, and that there are lots of other things we can do here. I have some students that were working on doing this with a deep learning framework using a dynamic embedding approach. But this is really just stringing together a number of different algorithms in order to get the belief landscape. So the idea here is first we extract just the tweets that are belief-laden tweets. So these are tweets that have things like, you know, Hillary Clinton is a liar, or climate change is a hoax. Right? So these are belief-like tweets. And then we map all of these tweets into an embedding space in order to cluster them semantically, so that climate change is a hoax and climate change is a lie would become the same sort of belief. And then we take these beliefs, and through a couple of steps, we cluster them to form a landscape. And then we measure people's movements across this landscape using a sliding window. So I'll give you just a little bit more detail here. So in order to extract belief tweets, we built a custom spacey pipeline. And once I get the code cleaned up, I'll make it publicly available. I'm going to have to do that pretty soon. And what this does is really, it's just sort of a glorified subject verb object parser. So here's an example. We've got a tweet here. I've been a vegan and veganism promoter for years. All right. And the second line is identified as a belief-laden sentence in this tweet, or the second sentence here is identified as belief-laden. And it's got two beliefs, according to my parser. The first, the subject is veganism, verb is, and very comprehensive. Okay, and then the second belief, veganism is not only ethical, but also logical. Okay, so that's kind of what the belief parser does. It's not perfect, but I think it probably, you know, just roughly, I think it probably gets about 60% of what I would consider to be valid beliefs. That's not a number I've tested. This would be a very hard thing to evaluate. Okay, once we've got those belief-like tweets, we take those and we put them into a transformer-based model to derive an embedding space, and then cluster the embedding space using HDB scan. So HDB scan is a soft clustering method, which means that we're not going to get everything, but we're just going to get the really dense regions. And so the embedding space, I'm moving that into a two-dimensional space. And so there is a valid question whether or not it makes sense to map things into a two-dimensional space, or whether I need higher dimensions. But for the sake of this work, and we're using UMAP. UMAP is a really wonderful, relatively new approach to dimensionality reduction. So it's a topological approach to reducing dimensionality that is designed to do the preserved distances as best as possible. Okay, so as opposed to spectral methods, which are just using variance. So in this image here, this is an actual image from the embedding the embedding of our network. The clusters here reflect actually semantically distinct belief, or semantically distinct regions. So there are multiple belief tweets in each of these regions, and we can call each of these clusters a belief. Okay, we're just going to say, you know, all of these things in each cluster are a specific belief, right? These are our belief propositions. Then we can take each user and pass a window over their histories And we can measure the number of times they create tweets in any one of those clusters. And so we get a vector, a moving vector over each individual. So this is capturing the belief state of each individual over time. Again, there are questions here like, how long a window do I use? And so we explored that a little bit in this paper here. Okay, once we've got those belief vectors for each individual, we take all of the vectors and we put them into another dimensionality reduction process, again using UMAP, and we can pull out of that a density plot. And that density plot gives us the belief landscape. And this is an image of the belief landscape we got from this data. The darker regions are actually, they correspond to strong attractors. That's where most of the population seems to wind up clustering. Of course, people are moving around. So with this belief landscape, we're able to measure dynamics and evaluate our predictions. So it's worth saying that it was not easy to get an embedding space that worked, and we had to do a lot of tuning with the language model. What we found with vanilla models, we tried a whole bunch of different models because there are many available. They tend to not be very good at distinguishing between positionally distinct tweets that are semantically similar. So for instance, in the original BERT model, climate change is real and climate change is not real have a cosine similarity of 0.95. Now these things seem to be diametrically opposed, but they are semantically quite similar from the perspective of existing transformer models. So we developed a routine for fine-tuning the model using the known stances of the individuals in order to shove apart these positionally distinct tweets. And so you can see here before tuning, the blue and the orange are individuals who have different stances, so the skeptics and the believers. And they're sort of overlapping in all of the semantic regions of the embedding space. After fine-tuning, we were able to get them to separate, and we were still able to maintain some of the semantic distinctiveness. So that is an area for improvement. Okay, so we evaluated this stuff. We evaluated our 4 predictions, and we used different window sizes over each individual's history, right? Recall I was using sliding windows. So first, our first hypothesis, people will tend to visit few attractors. So I quantified this as stability. So stability is 1 minus the number of attractors present over the number of posts, okay? So the more attractors someone visits in their posting behavior, the less stable they're going to be. And so these are just histograms over the different window sizes. And you can see that in general, that histogram is skewed to the right. People do tend to be stable. By and large, they tend to visit few attractors. Okay, there is definitely some dynamics here, more than I had actually expected, but it does seem to at least provide partial support for this first hypothesis. We also looked at H2 here, individuals who occupy more peripheral regions of an attractor or are near weak attractors are more likely to transition to new attractors. So we used a logistic regression here to using the independent variables of strength of the attractor and distance from the attractor. Okay, so we picked the closest attractor for each individual, and we evaluated the likelihood that they would move. Okay, and what we found is that as distance increases, again, these results are sensitive to parameters. By and large, as distance increases, they're significantly more likely to move away from their current attractor. And by and large, as the strength of the attractor increases, they are less likely to move away from their current attractor. There is some variance over the different windows, but there's partial support here, I think, for H2 as well. H3, transitions between nearby adjacent belief attractors are more likely than transitions between distant attractors. So here we took everyone who moved at any given point in time from attractor to attractor, and we measured how far away. We ranked the attractors that people were moving to from 1 to 20. So we only took the 20 nearest attractors, and we looked at how many transitions were to nearby attractors versus attractors that were far away. And what you see here in these graphs is that over the different window sizes, people tend to jump to nearby attractors rather than attractors that are far away. Okay, so again, partial support for H3. Okay, and then finally, to evaluate belief homophily, we just looked to see if people who believe in climate change are close to other people who believe in climate change, and people who seem to be skeptics are close to people who are skeptics. And so what homophily is showing here is the percentage of their nearest neighbors. I forget how many nearest neighbors we took. We may have taken 20 nearest neighbors. The percentage of nearest neighbors that are similar to them, similar to each individual. And there's a very strong signal here. People tend to surround themselves with people that are like, that hold similar beliefs. There's a little bit more variance on the skeptic side. And one of the reasons for that is that there are just very few skeptics on Twitter, comparatively speaking. So, but I think this is decent support for H4. Okay. After this, we inspected the belief landscape just to sort of get a more qualitative understanding of what was going on here. So we just looking at some of the centers here. So you're able to measure the density map and pull out the centers of the attractors. I don't know if you could see there, some of the dots are orange and some of the dots are blue. The dots that are orange over here, so it's 2 and 4, those are the skeptics, okay? And then all the other ones are the believers. So we looked at the tweets that were representative of people at these points in time. This is the most dominant attractor, attractor 1. And this is really global, really talking about global climate change policy, focusing on OECD countries. A lot of talk about leaders and what leaders need to do. This is an anti-Trump attractor. Talks a little bit about climate change. Whoops, I guess all right, well, so attractor number 2, let's see if I can get that back. Okay, attractor number 2, Trump ruins absolutely everything. So this is anti-Trump attractor, not so much about climate change, mostly about Trump. This one is skeptics attractor. This is really mostly ad hominem attacks on climate change believers. So they will, call people names, say you don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot. This one is also a skeptics attractor, but this tends to be focused on conservative values and actually brings data, right? So data in quotes to the argument. So these two are skeptics regions, but they're distinct in how they approach things. And then finally, this is a highly liberal, election-focused area. Does talk about climate, but talks about climate and politics, okay, and local US politics. Okay, so these are just some of the regions, and you can go through the data and find most representative tweets, and they change over time. Okay, so we then explore the dynamics. So this is just a movie of the movements of people across this landscape. It takes a little time, okay? But what I'd like to point out, if you watch, new people are coming into this data set all the time. Okay, so that's why you're seeing more dots. I did a Google Trends search for the word climate change, and you see it around September 15th, there's this big spike. So I'm going to wait for this to go. You just get a sense of what's going on. You notice that the orange dots are not moving quite as much as the blue dots. The orange dots tend to move between the two skeptics regions, but not much more. All right, so we're getting closer here to September. And I don't know if this is going to come through, but look at, if you could catch what happens September 15th. There was a big jump there between two regions. So a lot of people moved from over here over to this region on the right-hand side. This region on the right-hand side is area 13, because that's the number of the attractor for me. Okay, and I want to talk a little bit about this region here. Okay, so we found in area 13, after noticing this jump, this was actually, there was an event, and that was when Biden gave a speech, I think, and at the same time, Trump was in California, met with Governor Newsom, and we see a bunch of tweets in area 13 that are all about the wildfires that were going on in California at the time. This Trump being a climate arsonist. And for each of these tweets, I have the individual beliefs that I was able to pull out of those tweets. Okay, so this is what was going on, and this is what drew all of those people over to area 13. And you can look at these dynamics over the course of days. On the right-hand side here, the flow differences. The blue is the balance of people moving into this belief attractor, area 13. And you see on September 15th, things really spiked. And then the orange is the flow moving out, so the balance moving out. So there were, about 70 more people moving, or 70 something more people moving in, or actually a little bit more than that. So 80 something people moving in on September 15th. And then after that, people started flowing out again. And these are the flow maps. If you were to look at these, September 13th, 14th, 15th, and then 16th. And you can kind of see how the flow changes over this period. All right, so if we look at these dynamics, it's pretty interesting. We saw 582 posters were active in area 13th between September 14th and 15th. About 11%, so let's see, so 161, I don't have the percentages there, 161 of these people were brand new to the discussion. All right, after that, fraction of them left the discussion entirely. Others, about 51% of that 131 people, went to elsewhere in the belief landscape. And then another 31% or so stayed around in that area. Okay, home posters, these are people who were previously in area 13. Well, 2% left entirely afterwards. 46% stayed, went elsewhere on the landscape, and then 50% stayed. And foreign posters are posters who were in different belief attractors previously. 325 of those people came in to post in area 13. And then about 46% of them went elsewhere in the landscape, but 45% of them, these people stayed in Area 13. So they had other homes and they came to Area 13. Then they stuck around in Area 13. Okay, so 34 of the 150 people that went elsewhere on the landscape among forum posters actually went back to their original homes. The rest went somewhere else on the landscape. These people, I don't know, did they change their beliefs? That's a good question, right? This is what this analysis leads me to. Are we actually witnessing persistent belief change as a result of events that occur in the world? So these 147 people, they were posting elsewhere on the belief landscape, and then they moved to Area 13 and they kept posting there. Okay, so all of a sudden they've been politicized. They were talking about climate change, talking about other things, and then they became politicized by this event. It's a hypothesis, right? It's something we have to investigate. Okay, so in conclusion, we have partial support for hypotheses 1 through 3 and strong support for hypothesis 4. And I think the belief landscape framework is a plausible strategy for examining belief dynamics in social media. And as I've shown, you can use it to really explore the impact of media events on belief dynamics. And it raises interesting questions about what these deviations mean and whether some of these deviations are sticky, in the sense, do certain kinds of events actually transform people's underlying beliefs? And can we see that through this kind of analysis? There are certainly limitations. This is very early stage work, highly sensitive to parameters. And, there's a question as to whether or not is this just fancy topic analysis? Are we actually getting at beliefs? I think it's debatable still. It's not purely topic oriented, because these belief areas actually change. These attractors, they change. The dominant conversation going on in these belief attractors does change over the course of the data set. So it's not exactly topic analysis. Is it beliefs? Well, we can talk about that. Okay, so future work, there's lots of things to do here, and we're actively working on all of them. We need to improve our language models. Tristan actually pointed me to a language model that I think is going to be a little bit better. We're currently trying that one out. We have to optimize our parameters, and we're using, in order to optimize those parameters, we're trying to tune it to improve the stability of the population, because we think beliefs should be more stable. What I've noticed, though, is that some people on this landscape seem to move in consistent patterns across the landscape. So beliefs may be one level up from where we are right now. We're applying this to larger and more representative samples, and also moving into other platforms. And then we're trying to use some modeling to create predictive dynamics. We'd like to be able to predict, is someone going to move from one belief region to another? This seems to be pretty important if you're looking at things like extremism, right? So if we could model this and identify belief attractors associated with extremism, can we predict if someone is going to move into one of those places or move out? And finally, at a high level, what we'd really like to do is quantify the health of belief dynamics. There's a lot to talk about there. But initially we could do things like, well, where does misinformation exist in this landscape, and how do the dynamics of people around misinformation change? Okay, so finally, I think this is sort of a foundation for building a belief observatory. Even though this is very preliminary work, I was heartened to find that, the hypotheses at least were reasonably well supported. I think that future work on this is going to require rich collaboration between people in the space, because we can ingest a lot more than just Twitter data. But that's going to require people who are experts in those sorts of things, and that's not me. So I'm hoping that in giving talks like this, I'll be able to invite people to collaborate. Okay, I'll take questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Josh. That was really, really interesting. We've got our first question in the chat. How is an attractor measured? Is it measured by internal belief coherence of an individual, or is it aggregated somewhat?
It's aggregated. So a belief attractor is a density plot over the population. So that just means, that a lot of the population wound up being in that region.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Mark's question next before we go back to the chat.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That was really fascinating. Lovely to hear about it. There's clearly a lot of expert skill in interrogating this data. There's a lot of sort of parameters that you can tweak and optimize. My question relates to how reproducible in the sense of, if somebody else was given this data set, somebody that you trusted, who you thought knew what they were doing, do you think they would arrive at the same conclusions as you have? And is there a role for sort of pre-registering some of this work in order to to maybe pre-specify the parameters that you're going to use, or is that not going to work?
So this was exploratory. The code and data will be available, although the tweets will have to be rehydrated because of Twitter's policies. But I think that people are going to get roughly the same results using the approach here. There's nothing, I'm not hiding anything. I did in the paper, if you look at the paper, I did explore part of the parameter region. And so these results are sort of, they're okay. They're not perfect. I think the trends seem, I don't even know how you would approach statistical significance here. I think the trends seem to suggest there is some validity to this, understanding of things as attractors. Moving towards something like pre-registering, what we need to do is, what we're trying to do right now is come up with a means for tuning the parameter space that are not dependent upon gold data, because I don't know how we could come up with gold data, but really looking at the so what we're taking as our criterion, our criterion of optimization is the stability of the population. So we're generating metrics right now that will measure the stability of flows, both across and within attractors. And then we're going to do basically a grid search over the parameter space in order to see if there is a region where things plateau. And I think once we get there, then we'd be in a position to pre-register, because we could say, okay, we're going to optimize via this procedure. And once we get there, we would expect to see this. But we're not quite there yet. That's current work.
Okay, we've got another question in the chat, which I think is referring to your SPACY pipeline for statements. So it's, how do you check the statements you're getting out of this SPACY pipeline? Do you use a small sample and manual analysis, or some other means?
Yeah, that's just it. That's just it. We did a small sample manual analysis. And actually what we did in the paper is we only took the top 100 subjects. So if you look at the way belief statements are organized, you get a long tail over subjects that are pulled out of the subject verb object parser. So we took the top 50 subjects from, actually we took the top, we measured subjects for skeptics and for believers. We added those two things together. We took the top 100 subjects out of that ranked list and used those as the beliefs in our, as the main belief subjects in our data. And in the process of doing that, in eyeballing things, we found that there are a lot of beliefs The subjects are really weird. They don't seem to make sense, but they also tend to show up statistically less than others. So we tried to sample out of the Spacey parser the belief subjects that were pretty good. And the top 100 or so were a good list. So you would get these complex subjects out of the parser that are like, you know, the incredibly lame Republicans, right? The incredibly lame Republicans is not a subject that I can actually like do much with. And I didn't develop the technology to just boil that down to Republicans. Like we didn't worry, you know, we have these adjective phrases. And so there's a lot of noise in there. But if you're careful in how you sample, you get the things that are most persistent. And those wind up giving you a good signal in the data. Again, I will make this available and hopefully someone else will tune it. When I built this, I could not find a good subject verb object parser. There is one that is part of the Spacey library, or part of the Spacey universe, and it just didn't do what I needed it to do. So this is a slight iteration on that. So I'm hoping the community can help. And I don't know how to approach this from the perspective of a more rigorous evaluation. And I'd be interested in suggestions.
Okay, and
I see
Mohsen?
a hand right now. But I think you're muted.
Thank you very much. That was a great talk. I have two quick questions or like comment or suggestion. The first one is it would be worth looking more into who are these people in terms of like estimated political ideology, the common accounts they follow, the common accounts they retweet from, the common domains they retweet from. And then you can construct the network of these people based on this relationship. And you can see if the pattern you found based on their expression of ideas also hold in other domain, which would be interesting if it's the same or it could be different, particularly when they're expressing their opinions. It's also important what kind of information they're exposed to, then condition of exposure, how they express their opinions. And a quick clarification question with regard to the clustering you did you make snapshot over time and you saw and you monitor the evolution, or use the same model and you just retrain the same model over time to see how the pattern evolved? Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand. The first point is very well taken, and it is definitely something we're beginning to explore. So we're actually in the process of writing a grant proposal to look at how social networks we've got a multi-layer network here, right? You've got a network of beliefs and you've got a network, the social network. These things are going to influence one another. So it's a beautiful multi-layer network dynamics problem. And so we're trying to make some headway on that right now. With respect to okay, so your question actually gets at a very interesting, deeper question, which is whether you can actually do this on a fixed landscape or whether or not the landscape itself deforms over time. And I think the landscape itself probably does deform over time, but within a 5-month period, I said, no, it doesn't deform. And I took one landscape, I then did the density plot over the entire landscape. And then I windowed individuals and I watched their movements across that landscape. I moved them into the same model. So with UMAP, you can actually develop a model and then pull in new data to see where it becomes embedded in this model. So that's essentially what I was doing. But the deeper and really more interesting question is how these patterns of communication transform the underlying belief landscape. So imagining this, not my belief landscape, but the ideal belief landscape, I mean, we're transforming our beliefs as society all the time. And so I'm just not quite sure how to deal with it right now, because I don't know. There's a lot to think about there, but you raised a great point, and it's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we are at the end of our time. There is one question in the chat. So Josh, do you have the time to take this one quickly?
Sure.
Okay, we've got a question about the stable state of building up a belief. Is Twitter really reliable as a source for how these beliefs are formed? And as a follow-up, what other sources would you consider as data providers for such purposes?
It's a great question. All right, so this is philosophically a really deep question. Okay, first of all, you have to ask whether or not any data is going to give you a person's true beliefs. And I think there's a real problem here, because almost any question you asked is going to yield a context-dependent response. I don't think beliefs are observable. I don't think individuals, and there's a lot of psychology about this, psychological work in this area. I don't know that beliefs are actually things that we know until we actually utter them. And after that point, they may be, they're sort of like you've almost got an observer paradox. So, okay. That being said, is Twitter even a close approximation to that? I don't know. I will say that I think that people are strategic in what they say, but what they say and the strategy that they use is also dependent upon their beliefs. So if I choose to say more often than not that you're an idiot for believing in climate change, versus another skeptic who will tend to bring data or emphasize conservative beliefs, we both might not believe in climate change, but we have different patterns of speech, which dictate how we engage with the rest of the population. Do those different patterns of belief indicate, or different patterns of speech indicate different belief states? I don't know. I think it depends on how large a context you're looking at. If Tristan and I, we get together and we say, yeah, we totally believe in exactly the same things, but then we go out there on Twitter or wherever and we say completely different things, then I'm not sure we did actually believe the same thing in the first place. Now, you're right, though, that Twitter is just a slice, and it's really, it's not going to give us a whole picture. I can't ethically feel good about trying to enrich my data by stalking individuals on Twitter. All right, even though it's probably feasible, I don't want to go and look at all of their social media channels. There are a couple of different things, though. We can get aggregate data by looking across multiple platforms and sort of unifying these and building up a space and seeing if we see the same sorts of belief attractors on Reddit and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, Pinterest, or whatever it is you're looking at. And that would help us, at least it would improve the robustness of the analysis. But I think that ultimately we also need to do some deep qualitative work, where we begin with this social media data and then follow up with interviews and see if there are strong correlations between a rich subjective analysis, rich qualitative analysis, and this data-driven thing. And I think if we were to do that, we would be able to have a little bit more confidence, or maybe it would tell us that our analysis is bunk. But I'm really interested in your thoughts about how best to do this. So if we don't have time here, please email me because I'd like to see how we can make this a little bit more rigorous.
I don't see any more chat questions coming up, Josh. So I'll just say thank you once again. That was a great talk.
Cool.
Did you want to share? I don't know if you put your email address on one of the slides. If you wanted to share it in the chat for that follow-up.
I did not. Yeah, let me, I can figure out how to share it in the chat. Let's see here. Okay. Will this chat be captured? Because I didn't have a chance to look at it. Here, actually, I'm just going to save chat. Okay. I have now saved the chat. All right, and I'm eager to find collaborators, and please email me.
Okay, thanks again, Josh.
All right.
I
Thanks.
guess that's everything.
All right. All right. See you. Thanks for having me.
Helen, have you got the recording? I don't want to cut it off and break everything and lose it.
See you, Tristan.